The stains of yesterday's contests still clung to the stone like a shadow beneath the stands. Vendors barked for attention, baskets brimming with olives and watered wine, ready for the incoming crowd. Beyond the iron gates, handlers shoved famished predators into place, lions with ribs jutting through their fur, elephants stamping in rage, panthers raking their claws against the bars of their cages. From the tunnels came the sharp clang of swords, not practice swings, but tests for the day's deadly steel. And over it all, a low hum swelled into a roar, tens of thousands of Romans pouring in, hungry for the one thing their empire perfected better than anyone: a lethal spectacle. The Roman arena wasn't just sport. It was a laboratory for cruelty, engineered to control. Emperors flooded the sand for naval battles, starved wild animals, and forced prisoners into myths. Each performance ended with their final, fatal act. None of this was accidental. It was policy, woven deep into Rome's machinery of control. Cheering from the stands wasn't harmless. It was loyalty, shouted loud enough to echo through history. And today, we're stepping straight into that shadow.
These are the most brutal, most inhumane arena acts that went too far, even for Rome.
From sanguine funeral rites to executions dressed as theater, we'll uncover an empire's glory, built on turning suffering into applause. Before we dive in, hit subscribe for our next descent.
Now, take your seat. The gates are creaking open.
In 264 BC, the sons of Decimus Junius Brutus Scaeva chose to honor their father with spectacle.
They armed 3 pairs of slaves and sent them to fight to their last breath in the Forum Boarium, a cattle market thick with the stench of dung and smoke. This wasn't entertainment. It was a munus, a duty. An obligation owed to the dead, with roots stretching far beyond Rome. Over time, the ritual shifted to combat. The dead now demanded duels between chosen men. The Samnites, once Rome's bitter enemies, held such contests, and Roman elites eagerly embraced the custom.
Burying a man with treasures showed wealth. Burying him with a drenched spectacle proved power.
But funerals were only the beginning. By the 3rd century BC, Rome's leaders saw a new potential. Religious festivals, once solemn offerings to Jupiter, began featuring gladiators. The Senate framed it as piety, but the crowd knew the truth. State-sponsored violence designed to keep the people loyal. Even the armor told stories. Fighters wore the shapes of conquered foes: the Samnite, the Thracian, the Gaul.
Their struggle in the arena mirrored Rome's victories, replayed blow after blow.
The spectacle became propaganda. As the contests continued, the venues grew from temporary wood to permanent stoth. The games no longer belonged to grieving families. They belonged to the state. Each contest whispered the same message. Rome commanded men, armies, even death itself. No one could have guessed how far it would go. What started as ritual morphed into theater, and duty became obsession. Rome had discovered a new weapon, power over not just the living, but the meaning of dying. And once unleashed, it never closed that door.
The crowd's roar wasn't reserved for men. Sometimes it thundered for beasts from the edges of the known world.
Lions from North Africa, leopards from the Caucasus, crocodiles from the Nile, even giraffes dragged across deserts.
They weren't displayed as wonders of nature, but condemned as prey in a carnival of destruction.
Romans called these shows venationes, hunts. They were about domination, proof the empire could destroy the wild. Julius Caesar set the tone in 46 BC, parading a giraffe, the first ever seen in Europe. They called it a camelopard, half camel, half leopard. But it wasn't admired. It was brought to meet its end. The message was unmistakable. If Rome could seize the strangest beasts alive, it could conquer anything. The scale of the spectacle only grew. When the Colosseum opened, Emperor Titus oversaw the demise of 9,000 animals. Archaeologists have found bones etched with marks of deliberate starvation, ensuring a quick, decisive end. Even elephants, once the terror of Roman legions under Hannibal, were herded into the arena and dispatched for cheers. Behind the scenes, the logistics were part of the theater. Exotic creatures had to be trapped and hauled across deserts,
Kept alive just long enough to meet their doom, delivering victims to a city that demanded fresh spectacle.
Watching a panther explode from a cage in front of 50,000 screaming spectators, that was power made visible.
Every creature was a living souvenir of conquest, proof that the empire's reach knew no limits.
Some emperors, like Commodus, made these hunts their private stages, striding into the arena dressed as Hercules.
Dispatching hundreds of animals himself, he wanted to look like a god, but everyone saw the truth. A fragile ego with a bow. The hunts were often rigged, animals chained or half-starved for a guaranteed victory.
And the people cheered, not because they admired him, but because when the emperor hunts, silence could be fatal.
Behind the cheers, a quieter tragedy unfolded. Ancient writers like Pliny the Elder warned of species vanishing.
After decades of Roman spectacles, lions, leopards, and elephants were pushed toward extinction. The Colosseum wasn't just a theater of destruction. It was an ecological wrecking ball. But for Rome, what mattered was the illusion that nature itself could be captured and destroyed for fun.
Every fallen creature on the sand was another brick in the wall of imperial control.
When you picture a gladiator, you might imagine evenly matched warriors. The reality was far more twisted. Rome thrived on imbalance, on contests engineered for cruelty. They built bizarre weapons and imposed absurd rules.
Prisoners were shoved into the arena dressed as clowns, handed wooden swords, and sent to face seasoned killers. The crowd jeered as the condemned stumbled and fell, public execution neatly disguised as sport.
Even the weapons became characters. The retiarius fought with a fisherman's net and trident, squaring off against the secutor, whose smooth, rounded helmet was designed to deflect the net. It wasn't pure skill. It was suspense, a living riddle of whether the net would ensnare or the sword break through. The numbles grew more obscene. One gladiator thrown against several foes, or entire units clashing like miniature armies, turning the arena floor into a chaotic aftermath of splintered shields and fallen combatants.
And when novelty wore thin, they reached further. Female gladiators, gladiatrices, stepped onto the sand.
Writers like Juvenal mocked them, yet records prove they fought against dwarves, against beasts, even against each other. Their presence blurred gender lines but reinforced a darker truth. No one was beyond Rome's hunger for spectacle. Even the helmets were weapons of torment, some narrowing vision or muffling sound, forcing fighters to stumble.
Armor wasn't always protection. Sometimes it was punishment. And then came the propaganda plays.
Gladiators dressed as barbarians, forced to mimic Rome's defeated enemies. Their inevitable loss reminded everyone who prevailed. Every mismatch, every exotic twist was carefully designed to keep crowds shocked, obedient, and begging for more. The Colosseum never settled for repetition. It invented new cruelties, always hunting for the next thrill.
By midday, the arena shifted gears. Combat gave way to theater, with death at center stage. Romans called it damnatio ad bestias, condemnation to the beasts. It was a script they could not refuse.
Criminals, deserters, rebellious slaves, prisoners of war became unwilling actors in an execution disguised as myth.
Each punishment matched their crime. Thieves dispatched by wolves.
Every scene was a morality play, written with a final, grim reality. The scale could stagger belief. During Emperor Trajan's Dacian victory, thousands of captives met their end over 103 relentless days. It wasn't random destruction. It was organized, paced like acts in a grim drama, until the next horror arrived. Animals were the stars of this nightmare. Lions were famished to a frenzy before release. Bears goaded into sudden fury. The uncertainty, would the beast strike fast or toy with its prey, kept the stands howling for more. Sometimes the cruelty came dressed as legend. Prisoners forced to play doomed heroes like Orpheus. Prometheus chained as vultures circled overhead. These weren't stories anymore. They were grim performances.
Death in Rome wasn't always just death. Sometimes it was grim, mocking theater for the condemned.
It wasn't enough to perish. They had to perform their demise, acting out Rome's myths with their own bodies. Executions became grotesque plays, where flesh replaced masks, and the script always ended in a final, agonizing act. Cruelty stretched far beyond wild beasts. Crucifixion was staged right inside the arena.
Men and women were nailed to timber while vendors hawked wine and children played nearby.
Fire joined the spectacle too. Prisoners were forced into the tunica molesta, a shirt soaked in pitch, then set ablaze. Living pyres writhing as smoke curled into the sky. As Tertullian bitterly wrote, they were living pyres. These killings were propaganda, warnings etched into the very soul of the condemned. Defy Rome, and you would die slowly, with tens of thousands watching. Not everyone could stomach it. But his protest drowned in the thunder of a crowd that came not for justice, but for the thrill of punishment. Rome's imagination didn't stall with sand and swords. Sometimes, emperors demanded oceans inside the city. Mock naval battles, naumachia, were spectacles on an insane scale, where water itself became a weapon. Julius Caesar set the precedent, digging an enormous basin, filling it with water and real ships. Thousands of condemned captives were shoved aboard and told to fight as rival fleets. They were men condemned to die for applause.
Arrows, catapults, and steel turned the basin into a floating scene of devastation.
Augustus expanded the madness, creating a basin fed by a custom aqueduct just to keep it full. 30 warships clashed there, each cramped with prisoners fated never to leave alive. The message, Rome could command seas. By 52 AD, Claudius staged another naumachia. The captives greeted him with the chilling salute.
Morituri te salutant. Those who are about to die salute you.
Fire, too, had its macabre myths. Victims were cast as heroes meeting incandescent fates, like Hercules. Or Mucius Scaevola, testing loyalty by holding his hand to the flames. The crowd watched as these figures met their fate. Their bravery reduced to ash. Their stories turned to mockery. Even the Colosseum's architecture fed the domination.
Engineers built channels to flood the sand for naval shows, then drain it for combat the next day.
Cruelty became an engineering project. Water, fire, flesh, everything was a prop in Rome's theater of control.
To submerge captives, to turn bodies into livyers.
The emperors weren't satisfied ruling men. They posed as rulers of the elements themselves.
By the late 1st century, executions were scripts dripping with creative malice, twisting legends into tools of humiliation.
Like the games of AD 80, the poet Martial recorded an actor cast as Orpheus, the musician who tamed beasts. In myth, animals sat enchanted by his lyre. In the arena, a bear was released and brought the singer to a fatal end. Art turned to parody, beauty to ruin. Another victim was forced to play Daedalus, who escaped Crete on waxen wings. Suspended on a crude device, he soared briefly before plunging to the beasts below. Martial quipped about the man's final moments.
Perhaps most grotesque, the myth of Pasiphae. One show staged her infamous.
The message was clear. Rome owned its myths as it owned its people.
For Rome, they were propaganda made flesh, proving the state could rewrite its own legends. In the Colosseum, stories weren't told with ink or marble. They were etched into memory, seared into history.
The line between rule and raw obsession blurred until an emperor's whim decided who lived and who died.
Caligula once ran out of animals and ordered spectators dragged from the stands to fill the gap.
They came to watch the spectacle, only to become part of it. Nero treated the arena as a personal stage.
Prisoners were dressed as tragic heroes, then brought to their end in ways that mirrored their scripted fates. Nero called it art. Rome whispered madness. And then came Commodus, the ultimate showman emperor. Cloaked as Hercules, he stormed the Colosseum, bleeding the state dry while forcing cheers from a terrified crowd. Not satisfied, he faced gladiators, but only with every advantage rigged. Losing was impossible. Clapping was compulsory. Domitian wielded the arena like a weapon of paranoia, staging midnight hunts by torchlight to keep Rome uneasy. Even good emperors weren't immune. Trajan marked victory with 103 days of games, thousands of fates sealed in celebration. Spectacle fed egos, but it carried a price. Caligula and Commodus both died violently, remembered for theater written with finality. The arena that lifted them up also exposed their madness. Not every Roman cheered. Cicero condemned cruelty for cruelty's sake, though he admitted the mob demanded games as proof of generosity. For Christians, the amphitheater was both persecution and proof. Those who refused to renounce their faith were delivered to lions. Their final moments were twisted into mass entertainment. Tertullian called the shows seedbeds of cruelty. Economically, the games devoured fortunes. Rulers bankrupted themselves, chasing spectacles grand enough to outshine predecessors. Culturally, the appetite dulled Rome's edge. Citizens who once honored discipline now demanded bread and circuses. As frontiers cracked and funds dried up, the arenas crumbled. By the 5th century, the Colosseum stood hollow, but the moral questions never faded. Could a society that trained its people to revel in spectacle truly endure?
Today, the Colosseum looms, scarred but proud. Walk its tunnels, and you might still hear echoes.
Iron clashing, beasts roaring, 50,000 voices rising as one.
Harder and more honest is to remember its purpose. Cruelty rehearsed until it felt normal. Rome's arenas weren't merely about spectacle. They were about control, shaping how citizens thought, laughed, and obeyed. Every hunt, every execution, every myth reborn in screams served the same end: to make power look eternal. And that is the warning carved into the ruins. A civilization that glorifies violence eventually crumbles beneath its own applause. Tell us, which of these spectacles, the hunts, the living pyres, or the emperor's shows, best reveals Rome's darkest soul? Drop your thought below. And if this dive into Rome's brutal entertainments gripped you, hit subscribe, so you don't miss our next journey into history's shadows. Until then, remember, the Colosseum may be quiet now, but its echoes of cruelty still breathe through the stones.